and welcome to Being Black in Britain, the podcast that captures the nature and the essence of the Black experience across the UK, but starting with the north of England. In today's episode, we will be speaking with Christian Weaver, human rights barrister based in Manchester, who has taken a leading role in the pursuit of social justice, particularly with the campaign of Awaab's Law. We also explore aspects of Christian's career journey, career future, and how he manages his mental health. Hope you enjoy it. Let's go. So, Christian, thank you so much for being on Being Black in Britain. I am really excited to kind of explore what you've been getting up to, because you have been busy, as we can see. And I just want to kind of unpack some of those things, why you've chosen to engage in this body of work and where it's going.
Of course.
But before we dig in, Christian, can you tell us who you are, what do you do, and why do you do it?
Of course. And can I just say it's an honor to be here. I know everybody says this at the start of podcasts, but I think what you guys are trying to do is incredible. Yeah. And I think the fact as well that you're focusing on bringing people's voices from the north as well. So often I watch these things and everyone's from London. So it's nice. It's a nice touch.
Thank you.
I'm Christian Weaver. I'm a barrister in Manchester, Garden Court, North Chambers, human rights law specifically. So that includes inquests, public inquiries. That's the main bulk of my work. And also what we call judicial review. So taking action against public bodies, whether that be the police or a prison service. So that's my legal practice. But I'm also an author. So I've written a book called The Law in 60 Seconds, a pocket guide to, I forgot the name of my own book. The Law in 60 Seconds, a pocket guide to your rights. And effectively, The Law in 60 Seconds was a project I started because I felt like although people understood the importance of the law, far too often they thought it was either too hard to learn about or would be too time consuming. So I thought, wouldn't it be great if just in a small pocket-sized book, you could have access to all of the legal rights you ought to know about. So how to get a refund in a shop or what to do if you're stopped by the police. So that's what led to the creation of it. So that's me, yeah.
I like that. The third one being, why do you do all this then? Why human rights law? Why engaging in this particular, very specific body of work? Why?
Sure. So one of my earliest childhood memories was I was at my granddad's house in Nottingham. So I'm from Nottingham. Okay. And I remember I must have been about 8 at the time, and there were people in the area that kept putting feces on his car, dog feces, we think it was. And it kept happening. Then he put a sign up outside of the house and it said, "This family will not be intimidated by racists." And I remember looking out of the window and thinking, wow, what a powerful act. But it's crazy. It was a really young age. But I did also think, wow, it's scary to live in a society whereby he didn't feel like, for whatever reason, the police would deal with that. He had to take things into his own hands. And then it raised the question of, well, when you can't trust the police or when you don't feel you can go to the police, for whatever reason that might be, then who do you turn to? So it raised all of these big questions for an 8-year-old. And then I think from there, just naturally, I was a black man growing up in Nottingham through a very dangerous time to live in Nottingham, frankly. So matters of stop and search with friends, in terms of disproportionate stop and search of black people, Nottingham at one point, I think officially did have the highest statistic. So in terms of what you see from people you know and how they're treated. So I think naturally it develops perhaps a somewhat distrust of authority, and maybe a healthy distrust of authority as well, because you've learned that authority isn't necessarily something you can blindly trust. And then I think from there, one thing led to another in terms of my interest in the area, and it led in the end to me being a human rights barrister. And the way in which I see my practice is always representing the little man against the all-powerful state, because I don't think there's anything worse really than feeling like you're just being abused because you don't have the power to deal with a situation. So my hope is to be that mouthpiece for potentially a less powerful person to stand up to the powerful authority, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So what I wanted to kind of zoom in on there is this idea of representing and being a mouthpiece for the little man, or for the marginalised, for those that perhaps are being abused or oppressed. My question is, do you feel then that in your position as barrister, you have been able to make a contribution to representing, to being a voice? Or do you find that by stepping in, you're just faced with all the more reasons why we are still faced with the issues that we're faced with. So do you feel like you are able to actually do anything?
That's a spectacular question. I think you are. I think, so very often when you're going through law school, people, I would like to think actually not at my law school, but the general thing is that barristers that go into this profession, or aspiring barristers going in saying, oh, I want to try and change laws and whatever, you're always told, oh no, you can't really do that. That's not what a lawyer is there to do. A lawyer is there to represent their client, and that's that, and it ends there. But I think that's a very pessimistic, depressing way to think of our job. And actually, by virtue of us having access to these courtrooms and seeing what goes on, I think there's somewhat an obligation on us to actually try and further things in society, because we're at the coalface, we're seeing the issues that are taking place. So to answer your question, when you're going into these courtrooms, and let's say you're against a prison service or a police force that have, or in fact, inquests are a very good example. So let's say you're in an inquest. Only in exceptional situations will a family be able to get what's called legal aid for the inquest, which means that unless they can afford lawyers themselves, they will have no way of having legal representation in an inquest. But on the other hand, the other parties represented, particularly if they're state bodies, so a police force or a prison service, they will, out of taxpayers' money, be funding very senior barristers, which can create a situation where you have an individual family going up against 3 barristers in a full institution, right? So there are situations where I am representing a family in those situations. And yes, you, of course, have a massive blockage because you have the whole power of a state defending something, and you're representing Joe from Macclesfield. But at the same time, I think, again, being in that situation makes you realize, gosh, we really need to work hard here, because unless we use this opportunity to change things, for year on year, people are going to be in this exact same situation and nothing will be changing. So I think a prime example, and the most recent one, was the tragic death of Awaab in Rochdale. So Awaab was a 2-year-old boy that died due to mold in his home that was owned by Rochdale Borough-wide Housing. Awaab's family complained on numerous occasions saying, this mold is harming the health of our child. A health visitor from the NHS went to the home. She said to Rochdale Borough-wide Housing, look, this could be harming Awaab. Nothing was done. Awaab then died. But as a result of that inquest now, the government have announced an Awaab's law that will be coming into place. Rochdale Borough-wide Housing is an organisation, and the CEO he was sacked. So there have been, perhaps not far enough, but the fact that the law has changed or will be changing represents a change that can come about from inquests. So that's an incredibly long way to answer your question, Chedza.
But you've answered
yes, it can make a change.
Yeah, you've answered that well. And in terms of looking at this particular case, as you were speaking, a part of me wants to kind of jump up, celebrate, and say, yes, like action, something is being done. But I think what grieves my heart is how something grievous needs to occur before, we then have to campaign against, change and positive change. Like, why does it always have to be that somebody has to die or somebody has to suffer before, the law is rightly serving its people? My question there in that particular instance is, what would you see as the success of that particular case? So yes, change has been made. Yes, there's been an acknowledgement. There's movement to some degree. But at which point do you then decide that actually I'm satisfied with the outcome of this particular case following the tragic death of this young boy?
Sure. So I think it goes towards a culture change in society. So as long as a situation exists whereby landlords feel that it's acceptable to have tenants in housing that's substandard, in housing that can damage their health, then cases like Awaab's, but actually people maybe not necessarily dying, but becoming ill as a result of the housing they're living in, or it affecting their mental health because they're living in literally unfit housing. Until there's a culture change whereby landlords deem that as unacceptable, then I don't think I personally could be satisfied, because the situation could still happen again. And I think the way in which that culture change can take place is, and I'm again mentioning this thing called legal aid, but it's by there being proper money available. So if people are living in housing that's substandard, they can actually take the case to court. Because at the moment, the law exists and, people shouldn't be living in housing that's unfit for human habitation or where things are falling down. But the reality is, unless it's incredibly serious, a person often can't afford to take their case to court. So in the absence of being able to enforce your rights, there's no encouragement for a landlord to actually deal with the issue. So until legal aid comes in, there won't be a culture change. And until there's a culture change, events like this can continue happening.
Whose responsibility is it to provide that legal aid in your estimation?
Government. And, resources are stretched everywhere, which is what you always hear. But the reality is, a 2-year-old boy died. And what's been interesting following that case actually is put a spotlight on poor housing. And when you realize the extent to which people are living in poor housing, and then when you consider other social issues, so many studies have been done that say that, your housing affects your mental health, your housing will affect how you do in employment, your housing will affect your relationships. So actually, it's not like by people being able to afford to take their cases to court in a housing context, you're only dealing with a housing issue. Actually, you're rectifying or helping rectify so many issues that are prevalent in society as well. So it really isn't a small thing. And the reality is, people might say, oh, but if you, that was a very southern but people might say, well, if you make legal aid available for all of these cases, then won't that mean that, someone's got to pay for it, the government have got to pay for it, that might increase taxes, all sorts of arguments. But the reality is that landlords knowing that their tenants can take action will mean that landlords fix the issues. So there'll probably, ironically, be less cases going to court because the issues are actually being dealt with. And that's the society we should want to live in.
I like that train of thought there, and that's really powerful. I think what I see there then is by the implementation of the law and policies, there's a certain degree of accountability that ensures that there won't be that level of neglect. Because where there are no laws, unfortunately, we try to see how much we can get away with before it's, inappropriate. So I think it's really exciting to see that movement is taking place right now as we speak. So yeah, thank you for being a part of that journey and implementing that change. My question there is that I know that you're not a one-man band. What does it look like you engaging in this body of work? Are you surrounded by a network, a community? Who has been involved in this particular case in terms of Awaab's family?
Yeah, so I think in terms of Awaab's case specifically, I always have to mention the Manchester Evening News. Because before any news outlet was covering this story, before I was even instructed on the case, the Manchester Evening News were highlighting the issue. And if I'm honest, that's the only reason I feel that so much traction came about following the case, because they'd sowed the seeds from the very start. So it was certainly a group effort in terms of that. So the Manchester Evening News, of course, the solicitors firm that instructed me, Farley's, in particular, Kelly Darlington and Alice Wood, change.org. So I think there are so many things that have led to a change in the law. It's not just what happened at the inquest, but it's also the fact that 180,000 members of the public signed a petition on change.org saying there needs to be an Awaab's law. So were it not for, frankly, the public and change.org helping us get that petition running, then that may have never come about as well. And I think, to be honest, Awaab's family showed remarkable levels of dignity throughout the process. I mean, we never know how we're going to act when we're in a truly tragic situation. And actually, I will say as well, an inquest are public, so there's nothing wrong in me saying this, but there were also times where Awaab's mother did literally burst into tears and have to leave court. So I don't want to actually minimize their pain, because it was huge and it was quite something to watch, actually. But then even amongst that, the fact they've been so dignified, despite the fact that, and just to stress what they've been up against, they've always said that this mold took Awaab's life. Awaab died in 2020. The inquest was late 2022. All the way in between, Rochdale Wide Housing was saying it was you guys that contributed to the mold in your house that led to the death of your child. Like, on a mental health level, I can't quite stress the impact that could have on a person. And what's more, they said that it was down to the ritual bathing practices of the family. They said that that was what caused the mold. There was absolutely no evidence to suggest that ritual bathing practices, whatever that means, were taking place.
What does that mean?
Who knows? The family don't know. And in the inquest, I asked the question, I said, well, what about ritual bathing practices? And they were just as confused as everybody else. What does that mean? They were saying we literally had a shower, like there was a shower fitted, that's what we used. So, Rochdale Borough Housing have since acknowledged that they got these things wrong. There's a new CEO now who's really trying to say, we got things wrong. But I think our issue is that were it not for the fact that an inquest took place, these things would never have come to light.
Sad.
Yeah, it really is.
It's really sad. But again, thank you for being a part of that journey. And I think what I did like there in terms of the beginning of the answer to that question was you acknowledging the different stakeholders, the different individuals and groups of people that have been involved in that process, showing how much it's not a one man's job, it's not one woman's job to advocate and to see social change in movement. It's everybody's responsibility to make their own small contribution to seeing positive change in our world. And the reason I say that is, every time we see injustice of a kind, we're always throwing hands and pointing fingers to say such and such should do and such should do. But it's how can we all get involved and how can we all kind of rally the troops and be involved in actioning social change. So thank you for kind of highlighting that. I just want to zoom in a little bit on your career specifically. My question is, where are you going with your career? Are we sticking with human rights law? Is the focus on family and community? Are there any other aspects of law that you'd want to unpack? Where's it going?
Sure. So I think for me, so it's funny. My job title is that of a barrister, but I very much feel like I'm just trying to live life as Christian Weaver and trying to live a life by those principles that I've tried to develop. So it so happens that that's now fallen into me being a barrister. But whenever people ask me this question, I always feel like I should have a proper answer. But I'm always beginning to find comfort in the fact that maybe I don't need an answer, because if you're just trying to live a life aligned to your values, I almost feel there's nothing more I can do. So in terms of what I can foresee, I'd like to think that I can continue working and trying to affect change through the cases I take on. And, I think it would be a shame for me not to feel that way, because having represented the family of Awaab Ishaq and having built the relationships now with media, with change.org, for example, and different stakeholders, I'd like to think that it would be that easier to make change from another case as well. So I think it would make sense for me to continue on that trajectory. But I don't know how long that will be for, but for now, it certainly works. And I think at the same time, if you'd asked me this question maybe a few months ago, my perspectives might have been different, because with each case, there's so much learning I have as well about society. So even following Awaab's case, it was quite remarkable to me that access that we as the legal team had to the corridors of power, Parliament Michael Gove, because of the public support, because of change.org, because the press were with us. And that made me realize, okay, wow, so it's quite possible to change law, and it's not that hard when public support is with you. So I don't know what I'm going to do with that knowledge yet, but I think I learned a lot about the clogs of society and how you get power and how power works and how power moves, just observing the last few months of my life.
I really like that. That's really interesting. It's the privilege of being in a position where you can do something. It goes back to what you said at the beginning about trying to, advocate for the little man, the one that doesn't have the voice, the one that doesn't have the power or the access. So that's really interesting that you almost get to kind of stand between the institution and community. So it's a lot of pressure to sit in such a position, but I feel like it's quite exciting that you get to kind of sit with access to both sides to some degree. That's really interesting. My question, though, is thinking about these cases, from case to case, you're dealing with some really heavy social issues pertaining to people's lives, well-being, livelihoods. How do you manage engaging with this body of work mentally? Because I personally find that really heavy to process. If every case looks anything like Awaab's story, that's really heavy to take on, taking on other people's burdens, struggles and challenges and fighting for them. There's a lot of fighting. So how do you how do you manage that? How do you process that at the end of the day when you go home? Do you take the work home? Do you switch off and it's just another working day and we go again tomorrow? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, it is my life, so there is no switching off. I think as you get more experienced, I remember the first time, in fact, before I was even a barrister, I worked for a charity called Inquest that deal with deaths in state custody. And I remember there was a day I came home from work there. I was living in Finsbury Park, or working in Finsbury Park in London. And I remember I was on I think it's the Victoria line or something. And I remember thinking, gosh, that was some heavy stuff I had to deal with today. And I remember thinking, like, I don't like the fact that I have to go to a job each day and just be surrounded by so much sadness. And then I remember, you look across the tube and I thought, oh, that girl, she looks like she's going to a nice, maybe marketing job. She had like a little bag that said like her marketing agency name on it or something. I thought, I wish I was doing something like that. But then I think I've realized over time that I think there are two things. Firstly, I think as human beings, when we're continually exposed to something, your skin does toughen somewhat to it. I think that is a thing. But then at the same time, as it happens, the deeper you get into cases and the more senior you become as a barrister, the more tragic the nature of the things you're being met with. So I don't think there's any easy way for me to explain it or go about it. I think, however, that there is quite something in being able to bring about positive outcomes for those families. And it's that thing of, I've got two options. I can either not go into this line of work because I think it's quite stressful and hard emotionally. And then potentially families are in court without legal representation and there's no redress for the fact that there was potentially an entity that played a role in somebody's death. Or you can think, do you know what? I'm going to put myself in the heat of it, bring about a positive result. And I think, it might be a different part of my brain, but there's a level of satisfaction I can get from that. That's like, almost because this is so traumatic, the fact that there's now something positive that's come out of it is a beautiful thing, because no matter how traumatic I find it, the mother, the father, the brother, it's worse for them. So that's how I see it. But there's no perfect answer. And I guess one thing on a personal level I have done now is, as barristers, we're technically self-employed. So I'll go through very busy periods, but then I'll also go through very quiet periods. And on those quiet periods, I entirely switch off from work. So in a way, I feel like I can keep the equilibrium a little bit by virtue of doing that.
I like that. And I guess my final question is around the concept of success. So what is success in your estimation? And what would that look like, or what does that look like in this occupation that you are in right now? What would success look like?
I think success for me is such a personal thing. So it's nothing to do with my career. So there might be things that happen in my career that meet my definition of success. But if I was to look at it through barrister metrics, it would be salary, it would be the profile of case and whatnot. But the reality is, if you're representing some of society's most vulnerable, you might not get paid on that case, and it will be a decision you make beforehand. But I might say, I want to take that on and I won't get paid. So that the metrics finances on that side, it won't be great, right? And so for me, it's just about doing things, there's limited time I have on this earth. And I feel like if I'm doing things each day and I'm like, yeah, that was the best thing I could have done today, that's success for me. And I have no clue how that will turn out in the end. But one thing I have learned is that almost perhaps as a byproduct, but it's given me access to opportunities I could never have dreamt of. So kind of being a published author, that was never something I aspired to be. But by following this line of thinking, it's led to opportunities like that, which have been great and have opened up doors in other areas, similar to being a barrister, similar to this legal change now. These aren't things you plan for, but just by living a life in your purpose, I suppose, things like that can happen that in a societal sense might appear to be success. So that's my answer there,
Okay, then to condense everything that you've just said in that 2 minutes into a single sentence, what then is success in your estimation?
It's something that only the person can define, and it's I really want to try and give an answer to this.
Go on.
So I feel like I was looking at the time in the right hand corner, but I think it's something that only you can define, and I think it's I think the first stage one of it
Yeah.
is figuring out what's important to you in life and what you truly care about in life. And then once you've got an idea of that and the values attached to that, living a life that's as closely in accordance with that as possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have that.
Okay, thank you.
I accept. No, that's brilliant. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for kind of taking us on that journey. I know it wasn't long, but it was just really good to kind of hear your reflections and thoughts on this journey that you've been on, specifically with the campaign work. My question then is, for the people that are listening and want to engage with you or reach out to you, is there any way that they can get in touch?
Yeah, of course. So my social medias are largely Christian Kamali. Kamali is my middle name. So on Twitter, which is probably the main platform I use, it's Christian and Kamali, spelled Kamali.
Lovely.
And then my Instagram is Christian Weaver and the number 60.
Lovely.
And yeah, it would be great to hear from people.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing. And stay in touch, Christian. It's been nice to kind of reach out, connect with you. In what year was it? It was during the pandemic, wasn't it, when we got you in for the Wall of Fame?
Yeah.
That was quite a while. But yeah, it's been nice kind of watching your journey from then onwards and just seeing, you're taking strides. So keep up the hard work. We see you, we appreciate you, and we're really grateful for all the effort that you're putting into, to making positive change in our community. Thank you, Christian.
That's incredible. Thanks so much, Chadza. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. To make sure you don't miss the next one or the one after that, ensure to follow us on all podcast platforms and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.